2020 has been an exceptionally terrible year for the media, who seem to constantly wrap themselves in glory this year.
Indeed. Journalist and co-founder of The Intercept, Glenn Greenwald, joins us to look back at the media's best, greatest, worst fails, however you want to put it, of 2020. Great to see you, Glenn.
Good to see you, Glenn.
Always happy to talk about the media's failures.
Yeah, it's kind of become a specialty of yours. What do you think? I mean, there's a lot to choose from this year. You know, you've been talking a lot lately about the Hunter Biden, the fact that the media just decided not to cover that for the election. That's certainly one candidate. But what did you think were some of the sort of greatest hits this year?
I think when I look at the worst episodes of media misconduct, what I look at are two things. One is just the recklessness involved in getting things wrong. Of course, we're all going to get things wrong. So the question is, was there a sound process that led to errors that are pardonable, or was the process reckless? And then secondly, to what extent has the behavior eroded trust in journalism, which I do actually think is quite important. And when I look at it from those two metrics, I think the worst episode or event of media misconduct is the way in which the coronavirus pandemic was covered. In particular, for months, all we heard was that everyone has a moral obligation to stay at home, even people who go to deserted beaches or to just go on a walk on a nature trail just to get their kids out of the house and breathe are acting irresponsibly. They're killing old people, killing grandma. There was all this shaming messages going on. And then the second, in late June and into early July, when mass protests erupted all around the country, hundreds or thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, just densely packed one on top of the other in a protest movement in the wake of the George Floyd killing, there was no attempt to reconcile that messaging. Suddenly it all turned to what these people are doing is noble. And not only do you no longer have the obligation to stay at home, you now have the obligation to go and march against racism on the grounds that racism is a worse public health menace than the coronavirus pandemic. And I think that when you combine that with the fact that even after that, they continue to try and shame people who were doing things like going to church or synagogues or gathering for outdoor protests for different causes. What it really made it seem like was there's no trust or confidence due to public health authorities or to media narratives surrounding this pandemic, that they're just manipulating this messaging to sanction certain events that they find politically palatable while demanding everybody stay home for the things that they don't value. And I think that was incredibly destructive of media credibility.
I completely agree, Glenn, especially when you look at numbers and people are like, why do people mistrust the vaccine? Or why do people not listen to this? I mean, this is why. And it's something that built up over time, and it became dramatically, it really just hurt public health guidance overall and so much more. What do you think in the political sphere when you're looking at, I mean, Hunter Biden is fresh of mind, but I think it probably traps and wraps into this whole, I mean, just the way that Russiagate was dealt with. If we think of 2020, I guess we began the year with impeachment and more because, you know, that was certainly something that was at the top of the news. What do you make of that cycle?
Well, I don't want to brush over the Hunter Biden reporting, because I actually think that what happened in the weeks leading up to the election was of historic significance, and I don't think it's important has yet been sufficiently appreciated. We have to remember that it wasn't just that media outlets decided that they weren't going to report on this cache of documents from Hunter Biden's laptop, however it materialized, that very few people had any doubts about concerning its authenticity, because not even the Bidens claimed that it was inauthentic. It wasn't just that they decided they weren't going to report on it, even though it involved not just Hunter Biden, but Joe Biden's activities in Ukraine and China. It was so much worse than that. It was that in order to justify why they weren't going to report on it, they seized on a completely manufactured, concocted lie generated by ex-operatives and officials of the intelligence community, John Brenner, James Clapper, General Michael Hayden, all the standard professional liars, which asserted with absolutely no evidence that this laptop was both Russian and was disinformation, meaning that Russia was behind its appearance and the documents should be ignored on the grounds that they're forgeries, neither of which was even remotely true. And so the same media outlets that have spent months or years warning about the dangers of disinformation and conspiracy theories and demanding that obscure citizens be removed from the internet because of their propensity to spread disinformation, lie to the public for weeks at least about these critical documents. And I think even worse than that, is we have to remember that Twitter and Facebook, two of the most powerful corporations in the world, censored the internet in order to prevent that story from being discussed. And journalists, rather than raising their voice in defense of free discourse and free speech, cheered it on the grounds that it was the responsible thing to do.
That's right.
I mean, you had an incredible post on this, and everyone should be subscribed to your Substack if they're not already, where you pulled some of the most embarrassing examples from the media of handling of the Hunter story. One that, I mean, they all sort of blow my mind, but this one really blows my mind. This is from the NPR public editor. They tweeted this out. Why haven't you seen any stories from NPR about the NY Post Hunter Biden story? Their answer, we don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories. And we don't want to waste the listeners' and readers' time on stories that are just pure distractions. I think, and I know you suspect this as well, the real reason why they didn't want to cover this is because they're also terrified of getting blamed for Trump's re-election again, that it kept them from actually doing their job as journalists of laying out what the facts are here for the American people so they can judge for themselves whether this is going to affect their vote or not.
Obviously, that was the reason. I mean, we have to remember, people will say, well, why should we have cared about Hunter Biden? He wasn't running for president. The documents raise serious questions about two things in particular involving not Hunter Biden, but Joe Biden. One was whether or not Joe Biden used his power as vice president to interfere in the internal affairs of Ukraine in order to benefit a company that was paying his son $50,000 a month in exchange for basically nothing. The other was whether Joe Biden, as he was getting ready to run for president, was pursuing profit participation in deals with entities in China with whom he was going to have a huge amount of responsibility if he ended up being president. None of that got investigated on the grounds that this was just Russian disinformation and we should ignore it. And of course, the reason is what you said. I know I was at a media outlet, The Intercept, which got blamed for 4 straight years by their liberal friends in Brooklyn and Northern Virginia, that we somehow helped Trump get elected by doing our jobs by reporting on the WikiLeaks documents. And they were petrified, every one of these outlets, that they were going to be accused of that again if they did anything that was going to be seen as helping Trump, even if it meant doing their jobs by investigating the presidential frontrunner.
Yeah,
it's so obvious. It really is disgraceful.
And lastly, Glenn, this is kind of more of a Trump era story, but as his era is coming, at least this part of the Trump era is coming to a close, what'd you make of the reporting on the national security state this year?
I mean, I think that one of the things that has been an underappreciated byproduct of the Trump presidency is after 2002 and 2003, the media learned this kind of temporary lesson that the security state exists to propagandize not just the world, but also American media and the U.S. population. And that was what they said they had learned as a result of things like weapons of mass destruction and the claim that Saddam was in an alliance with al-Qaeda. And what we've seen is a rejuvenation of this extremely close partnership between the security state on the one hand and the media outlets on the other who support the Democratic Party. And obviously the security state itself was very supportive of Biden's candidacy. And it's actually quite frightening because now this ruling coalition that's about to emerge of Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, Silicon Valley, Wall Street, and the intelligence community jointly with these media outlets are very, very powerful. And I don't think the security state has been as powerful or their reputations as burnished since at least the Cold War, or at least the Church Committee of the mid-1970s that revealed all of its abuses. It's been a huge gift to CIA and the FBI and the NSA, this kind of re-emergence of this coalition between the Democratic Party and these security state apparatuses.
Yeah, I think you're
so well
right.
said. I'm deeply envious of your backdrop and wherever you are. But Glenn, I hope you have a wonderful holiday. We're so grateful for you. Always love having you on the show this year and really appreciate all that you do in the world and also your willingness to come on here and educate us on the things that you're covering and reporting on.
That's right. Thank you, Glenn.
All right. Let me say I'm super grateful for your show as well. I think it's doing a great service, and happy holidays to both of you and to your listeners as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you.
All right. We'll have more Rising for you after this.